Welcome to Sabbath Vespers. I'm Nerida Taylor Bates, the president of the Association of Adventist Women. Isn't this a lovely spot? This is my neighbor Rita's garden, and every time I walk by, my blood pressure goes down and my spirits go up. So today I decided to do some mushrooming. That's a term we learned from Dr. Andrea Luxton last week. She talked about how sitting still in nature helped her hear the calling of the still small voice of God. I always find that beauty in music, art, and nature help me with self-care. But there are lots of kinds of self-care, aren't there? When I had small kids, all I wanted was 5 minutes to myself. Now that I'm an empty nester, I spend a lot of time alone, and my self-care needs are more communal. I like to spend time with girlfriends, commiserating and dissolving in laughter. Sometimes self-care is even hard work. For those who've been abused, self-care is often the work it takes to prevent others from facing the difficulties that we had. Our speaker today is one of the people that I like to do self-care with. Pastor Cheryl Prince McMillan and I went to high school together. Then she went on to become a pastor, get her master's in family and marriage therapy, and run a successful counseling business. She always makes me feel heard. Our panel today will be run by Dr. Beverly Buckles. She's the Dean of Behavioral Health at Loma University. Not only is she well published in resilience and self-care, she also runs the trauma response team that travels around the world to locations that have had natural disasters offering aid. I'm sure that you will be blessed whatever your self-care needs today. Let's bow our heads. Dear God, thank you so much that you offer us rest. Thank you for sunshine, for the birds singing and the children playing. Remind us of the quiet pastures that you have led us by in the past. Restore our souls. And Lord, if we're called to walk through the valley of the shadow of death, may your rod and staff comfort us. Amen.
Greetings, friends. I am Dr. Rita Mercer, and I attend Mount Rubidoux Seventh-day Adventist Church in Riverside, California, under the leadership of Pastor Michael B. Kelly II in the Southeastern California Conference. I facilitate an online Christian-based seeking safety support group for individuals who experience various types of trauma. I am honored to be asked by the Association of Adventist Women to participate in this virtual global conference on finding purpose in uncertain times. I've been asked to talk about self-care for leaders and the importance of self-care during a crisis. I will frame these next few minutes with the context as to the COVID-19 pandemic, the importance of self-care, and I will attempt to answer the question as to why leaders need self-care. We are in unprecedented and uncertain times. On March 11, 2020, the novel coronavirus disease, COVID-19, was declared a pandemic by the World Health Organization. On March 13, 2020, a national emergency was declared by the United States concerning the COVID-19 outbreak. It resulted in a complete shutdown of the nation. Retail stores, government offices, businesses, school districts, universities, and colleges closed. In 24 hours, the world as we know it changed dramatically, and we experienced an economic pandemic. 2 months later, the nation witnessed the murder of George Floyd on May 25, 2020. This resulted in riots in Minneapolis, the nation, and the world. We experienced a racial pandemic. William Wan, a reporter from Washington Post, penned an article in May of this year is stating that the coronavirus is pushing America into a mental health crisis. The isolation, the uncertainty about the cause of COVID 19, the rising deaths, economic crisis, dramatic increase in unemployment, and hypervigilance resulted in an increase in depression, substance abuse, anxiety, post traumatic stress disorder, and suicide. The Kaiser Foundation poll indicates that nearly half of all Americans report the coronavirus is harming their mental health. In these uncertain times, it is normal to feel stressed and overwhelmed. The range of emotions include anxiety, fear, anger, and sadness. It is not unusual to feel helpless or even discouraged and out of control. The physical response to these feelings include headaches, muscle tension, fatigue, insomnia, change in appetite, difficulty concentrating, and digestive issues. The uncertainty of when the coronavirus will end or when a vaccine will be available results in chronic stress and psychological distress that activates our stress response system or fight or flight, producing high and sustained levels of cortisol that weakens our immune system over time. What is particularly difficult about the pandemic is not knowing when or how it will end, says Dr. Portia Jackson Preston, a public health professor at California State University in Fullerton. If you are stressed, it weakens the immune system, which creates a high probability of complications of the coronavirus. The importance of practicing self care can minimize psychological distress and physical symptoms caused by a crisis such as the pandemic. The World Health Organization defines self care as the ability of individuals, families, and communities to promote health, prevent disease, maintain health, and cope with illness and disability with or without the support of a healthcare provider. So basically, what we're saying here is that self care is putting ourselves first, taking care of ourselves in mind, body, and spirit. In 1 Corinthians 6:19 through 20, it says, "Do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have from God? You are not your own, for you were bought with a price, so glorify God in your body." God has given us a mandate to take care of our mind, body, and spirit so that we will be well to do God's will. So, why should leaders need self care? An article by Harvard Business School, September 10th of this year, business leaders express uncertainty that it is stretching and breaking apart even the strongest teams. The article further states that due to COVID-19 outbreak, leaders are taking in vast amounts of information every day and adjusting to an entirely new set of behavioral habits. In addition, most are dealing with unprecedented tasks and decisions on the job and in their personal lives. David Kessler, an author and grief expert, quoted in a Harvard Business Review article that the loss of normalcy, the fear of economic toll, the loss of connection, this is hitting us and we're grieving collectively. We are not used to this kind of collective grief in the air. Leaders are responsible for setting the tone of the company. They're responsible for the employees in the workplace. If leaders do not take care of themselves, how can they be effective leaders? How will they be able to take care of those who are under their care? Good leaders focus on the needs of others. They are problem solvers, motivators. They are tuned into what their employees need to achieve optimum performance. They must continually make tough decisions. be able to plan for the future, collaborate, be open minded, and create positive change. If a good leader is not putting themselves first, it can cause irritability, isolation, and the inability to make good decisions. And things can just go downhill from there. It is clear to see that it is important that leaders take time for themselves and make their well being a priority. Remember, we are human, and God has given us the opportunity to be in leadership and service to Him and to others. Philippians 4:13 says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. As you move forward in leadership, I pray that God will continue to strengthen you and guide you through these uncertain and unprecedented times. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Prinz McMillan. I'm an ordained minister, a licensed marriage and family therapist, a mom, a wife, CEO, a friend. I don't know, a lot of other roles. My guess is you have all those too. We always carry a lot of hats, and we always carry a lot of roles as women, but right now we have additional roles of maybe nurse or mourner or teacher and home protector and grocery buyer and toilet paper searcher. And maybe we're all still looking for a lot of other things. And not only that, we're also called to champion human rights and racial rights, all in the name of being good women. It's a hard season. I know most of us have gone through different hard seasons in our lives, but none quite like this one. So I'd like to take the next little bit to talk about ways we can take care of ourselves and our family, particularly within a Christian context. As an ordained minister, it's important to me that we also look to resources from the Bible, from history, and as a licensed therapist, we also need to look at science. I know as an employer and somebody who had a clinic for many years, people would talk to me about self-care. Clients would talk to me about self-care, as would our staff. And I know there was hashtag self-care. People would take a day off or get their nails done and say self-care. But what I want to talk to you about today is not that. That's not self-care. Self-care is when you have a concerted, intentional plan that allows you to cope with the stresses in your life. Self-care is intentional and planned. So what I want to talk about now is some of the ways we can do that. First of all, let me tell you a little story. In 2016, our family took up skiing again. We had for many years skied, and then when our kids were young, it got expensive and we stopped for a while, and then we started up again. I enjoyed it immensely. Just nothing quite like going down a hill and feeling the wind and doing something fun with the family outdoors. Unfortunately, when you start saying, oh, I'm getting tired, you definitely should quit and not do that one last run. Well, we did the one last run, and of course I crashed, and my son was with me, and he says I crashed gloriously end over end. All I know is I needed to have ski patrol bring me in the toboggan all the way down the hill. The bad thing about those toboggans is you are going down with zero control, strapped in so you don't fall out, looking up at the sky, seeing the trees and the clouds and the snowflakes, and just going bumpity bump, bump, bump. And of course, ski patrol doesn't ski nice on those wide paths circling around the mountain. They just go straight down to get you to the doctor. Straight down in a toboggan, not knowing where we're going. Bumpity bump, bump, bump. I made it down. And of course, I made it to the hospital and we did all the things I need to do. But that ride was memorable. I think this year, 2020, is like a grand toboggan ride down the hill, bumpity bump, bump, bump. It's a ride we don't know when it's going to end, and that adds to our stress. Situational stress that lasts less than 6 months is what people call emergency kinds of stress, stress that can be resolved. You're assuming it's just happening once, it stops, you cope with it, and you move on. But stress that lasts longer than 6 months to a year or longer, is a kind of stress that takes a real wear and tear on your body. In fact, scientists have discovered that stress that lasts that long actually reduces your immune system. Your cardiovascular system actually goes into overdrive, and you have an increased likelihood of a major health event. None of us want that right now. We know that the stress has been going on for a long time, so we need to put on our very best self-care hats and take care of our families and loved ones as well. Well, we don't want to go bumpity bump down in a toboggan, but we do tend to be lonely when we are shut in and isolated, as many of us have been. And that also can reduce your immune system. Chronic loneliness can have a greater impact than smoking a cigarette. Sadness and loneliness, they can be shared. There's something called mental health first aid that is something we can all learn to help take care of each other. It's kind of like putting a Band-Aid on. When my kids were little, we would put Band-Aids on just because they got a boo-boo. Maybe it didn't bleed, maybe they just bumped it. But in bumping it, they hurt. And the Band-Aid was a badge that said, I hurt and I'm going to be okay. What we need right now is a way to tell the world, I hurt, but I'm going to be okay, and slap a mental health Band-Aid on ourselves. Maybe we need a badge that says, I hurt, but I'm going to be okay. There are many things that we need to do for self-care. Self-care, as I said, is not just that one time getting something done nice for myself, the bubble bath or the manicure, although those can be part of a system of self-care. It has to be intentional. And there are actually 5 domains of self-care, as we probably already know. There's our physical body that we have to take care of, our social sphere we need to take care of, emotional, psychological, and spiritual as well. We need to do self-care in all 5 of those domains. Let's start with the physical. There are lots of things that we all know we can do. In fact, sometimes we're filled with too many tips. You can go on the internet and look for self-care tips and feel guilty about all the things you're not doing. You're not doing the 1,000,001 yoga classes. You're not jogging enough. You're not bicycling enough. You're not taking your kids outside for enough fresh air. Well, stop with the guilt. Let's make a plan. Let's make sure you're eating healthy, getting lots of water, getting some regular exercise, and most of all, a regular bedtime and get up time, even though you can sleep in at times. Plenty of science has shown us that regular bedtimes and get up times actually reduces your stress significantly. But if you want to take care of your physical health, there's lots of tips and resources for you out there. It's your emotional and psychological health that sometimes are difficult to know how to tend to. In fact, when we're more isolated like we are right now, it becomes very difficult at times. Remember the story in the Gospels when Jesus is healing people and there is a man who couldn't walk and his friends wanted him to come in to see Jesus, but he couldn't walk in and the house is crowded. So what did they do? They somehow put him on a sheet, hoisted him up on top of the roof, and lowered him down in. Jesus healed the man. And he didn't say, I did it because you were a good man. What he said is, I did it because your friends had faith. The social and emotional and physical components are intertwined. We need to not only eat healthy and go to bed at a good time, but we also need to do things for routines with our families. We need to be able to stay connected socially. Recently, my dad had a birthday, and we emailed and called lots of family, trying to round them up to have a Zoom birthday party. My mom thought it sounded like a lot of trouble, but once we had it, we all had a lot of fun. We told jokes, we showed some pictures that we all had of my dad when he was younger, and we all laughed. In fact, it was so much fun that their family said they want to do it again next month. Just seeing some things that feel normal help everyone in the family. I made each of our kids get on their own screen. They do it at school, so why couldn't they do it for Grammy and the rest of the aunts and uncles. It made everybody feel like they had their own window in. We need to call and connect. Sit outside 6 feet away in your backyard. Make sure you talk to people and connect with the family. There are always games and things you can play with your kids, but it's important they find their own space for quiet as well, away from the computers that dominate their life. But you know, when we talk about self-care, we often feel heaviness because we have a sense of the things we should do. We live in a digital world that has plenty of resources, and we know that we should do our health care, and we should do our yoga, and we should be kind to ourselves and practice relaxation and exercise. We know these things. But you need to treat yourself with compassion, just as you would someone else. You need to stay connected, but you also need to monitor your own media consumption so it's not overwhelming, and monitor your children's as well. It is time that we need to very intentionally build patterns and routines and pivot if it doesn't work and try something different. We need to also be mindful of substance abuse and practice relaxation techniques. We need to breathe. Just taking a moment to breathe can make all the difference in the world. But remember, it requires relationships to stay connected so that we can breathe. The 5 domains, they're so interconnected. Remember those social domain? To call people? Sometimes you don't feel up to it. Maybe those are the times somebody else needs to reach out to you. There was an ultra marathoner who didn't start out that way. In fact, his name's Gordon Ansley, and in 1972 there was no such thing as an ultra marathon. And Gordon just enjoyed getting out in the hills. In fact, he was part of a group that did long distance horse races. And one year he didn't have a horse. So he decided he'd walk the trail. And he walked a ways and decided the next year that he'd go a bit further, maybe he'd do the whole route that the horses do. And he actually got to mile 26 without support like we do for today's marathon, and without a lot of water. He planted some bottles along the way, but not a lot of resources. He got up to the top of one of the highest hills and thought he was done. He was utterly exhausted. There was a group of women there who were ready to supply the horses and the horseback riders, and they wanted to encourage Gordon to keep going. Gordon was absolutely saturated with sweat and exhausted. And the women realized he'd lost his electrolytes. He needed something like Gatorade, some salt, some food, some drink. He needed to be re-nourished, and he couldn't see it himself because he was too utterly exhausted. These women took it upon themselves to do so, and Gordon not only completed the same run as the horses, but in record time. It became something that other people joined him in doing, and he held many, many records. And he often told the story about the very first race and how it was the women who remembered and reminded him that he needed the water and the salt, and they took care of him at mile 26. I think that sometimes we need to cut ourselves some slack and let others take care of us. And right now, that's hard to do. Right now, it's really hard to be lowered down by our friends and healed by Jesus. We need to watch for signs of trouble ourselves. We need to check in with our colleagues too, to see how they're faring. Signs of depression and anxiety are available to us readily. In fact, you can Google mental health first aid and learn tips and triggers that you can watch out for your friends, family, and colleagues. There's a whole sheet of resources I put together that'll be on the website that gives you some resources for self-care. You can Google away, but there's millions of websites out there anymore, so I put together a one-page sheet that touches on all 5 domains: spiritual resources, physical, social, mental, and emotional. I want you to make sure that you have a bunch of Band-Aids to slap on yourself and the rest of your family and friends. That you can watch out for signs of trouble. People who are too isolated, who you haven't heard from for a while. Children who stay in their rooms continuously and never come out and do anything physical. Children who don't have any friends that they can talk to. We need to each look out for each other. We need to stay connected. We need to find other ways to get ourselves outside as well. I understand that lots of people have now taken up hiking and outdoor activities and bicycling in droves. But there are others who are still shut inside and maybe not going out quite as much as they would like. There's plenty of research that suggests healing comes from green space. In Asia, they're actually using trees for healing. People who are depressed or anxious, they're writing a prescription to go walk in the woods rather than taking antidepressants. Maybe you have woods nearby. Maybe you don't. Maybe you can find other green space. Just simply a long walk can bring down your anxiety and depression more than about anything else. There was research a number of years back that looked at what was more effective, talk therapy, exercise, or medication for depression and anxiety. And of course, each has its efficacy and its timeliness. But they found that long walks, 45 minutes to an hour, actually were on par with medication or talk therapy. Now, of course, all three together are even better when you're really at high risk. But it goes to tell you, those long, rhythmic walks are significant. Jesus took long walks. We're told that he'd walk up into the hills, or he'd walk into a village. He'd walk away from the people and the throngs and take a moment by himself. We are told that he would also take time in nature, and he would use that as his spiritual refreshment. In fact, one of the most iconic stories in the New Testament is a story of Jesus walking on the water during the storm out to calm his disciples. He was taking time out, and they were out doing their duty of fishing. And the storm came up, and Jesus walked out to them and told the storm to calm down. And in the middle of all that crisis, he's walking upon the water to tell them things will be okay. But he took his moment, and then he was able to say it's going to be okay. I believe Jesus is calling us to do something likewise. Maybe not walk on water, but to take a moment in nature, a moment to heal, a moment outside of our family and ourselves, to smell the outdoors, to hear the birds calling. The other day I went for a bike ride and I saw a big flock of birds making a lot of noise, and I didn't pay a lot of attention until I came back around a corner and saw a guy out with a camera taking their picture. And I thought, oh, he must find it interesting that it's a flock. And then all of a sudden I saw a bird come down and dive bomb his head. It was a parrot squawking for all you're worth, and he ducked, and of course I'm not too far off. The parrot squawked and flew up off the air, and away he went. I didn't realize we had huge flocks of parrots flying over us here in Loma. It's kind of exciting. But it really made me think about how anxious I was feeling, because I jumped when the parrot squawked. I knew my anxiety was high, even though I was riding a bicycle, to jump at that squawking, and I knew that young man's was too, because he jumped even though he was taking a picture. Now, parrots are loud, but clearly anxiety can be high. But that time outdoors can be healing. Trees can be healing. Grass can be healing. And we need to get away from Zoom, or Zoom equivalent. Recent studies have shown that Zoom increases anxiety because we see all the faces at once, and we're called to pay attention to multiple things simultaneously, including seeing ourselves. One of the suggestions that I read that I think can be very helpful to you and your children is simply to focus on only one person. Put it in speaker mode. Make sure you're not seeing yourself while you're on these Zoom meetings. Make sure you're only seeing the person that you're connecting with. It allows you to settle and ground your attention and not be quite divided. You don't need anxiety just from having to talk to people on Zoom. You need to take time to truly greet whoever's in the room with your full attention. Choose that speaker view and resist the urge to multitask. Make sure and take measured breaks between sessions, and make sure your children and family do as well. And that is both part of their physical, emotional, and psychological well-being. It can also be part of their spiritual well-being. We know that children need to have healing environments while they're growing, and this is a crazy time. There was a big Kaiser longitudinal study, and they ended up coming up with a score that we give to kids called ACEs, Adverse Childhood Events. And an ACE score tells how many events you had in your childhood that were negative. And the higher your ACE score, the higher the correlation between major illnesses later in life, such as diabetes and coronary heart disease. The Kaiser study was shocked to learn that there was a direct correlation between lack of resources, both physical and emotional, in childhood abuse, childhood neglect, and childhood crises, and adult illnesses. What we need to be able to do is find ways to take care of our children so their ACEs scores don't go up. You can do a quick little ACEs survey if you're interested. If you just Google ACES score, there'll be a little score template that allows you to see what your ACE score is. If you score higher than 3, you know that your background had a lot of trauma. And it's going to be harder for you to find resources for you and for your family. It means it's vital that you find somebody to talk to, that you find resources that can hold you, that can be the blanket to lift you up. An ACE score is simply a number, but it does tell us that our kids are at higher risk because they're going through trauma. We need to check in with them as well on a regular basis. We want to make sure their spiritual well-being is also taken care of, that they can do self-exploration so that they can find time in nature. They can find their purpose as well as we do. We need to make sure that there's time for prayer and meditation both for us and for our families. One of the things that studies have shown us is that time outdoors is incredibly healing. Sitting in the grass reduces stress. Petting a dog is as good as an anti-anxiety medication. Now, I'm not advocating you get a pet if you're not ready for the downside as well. But if you've got one, remember to pet them daily, brush them daily, and walk them daily. It helps your mental health as well as good for the dogs. We want to be healthy people so we can help make a difference. When people are saying that there's discrimination and people are being hurt, we want to be able to stand up and make a difference, but we can't do that if we're falling apart. Most importantly, you need spiritual time, spiritual refreshment, as well as these other domains. Spiritually, you need to take quiet time and prayer time. Maybe journal, maybe do breathing and remembering that God is there. Maybe take a prayer time that is a combination of prayer and silence regularly every day. For me, going outside is a way of prayer, working in the garden or sitting under the trees and listening to the birds. These are times that I can remember that I am interconnected with all of God's creation. In Isaiah, we're told that God is like a mother hen gathering the chicks in under her wings. I love this image of God holding us close and sheltering us from a rain. Right now it's raining. We need God to hold us close. But we don't know that if we're not taking the time to remember that we too are part of all creation. One of the ways that can be very healing for people is to read poetry or short stories that are nurturing, that remind us of our connection to God and to all of creation. One of the poets that I enjoy is Mary Oliver, and she wrote a poem called The Summer Day. Let me read it to you. Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? The grasshopper, I mean, the one who's flung herself out of the grass, the one who's eating sugar out of my hand, who is moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down, who's gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearm and thoroughly washes her face, and now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention and to fall down into the grass, and how to kneel in the grass, and how to be idle and blessed. How to stroll through the fields, which is what I have been doing all day. Tell me what else I should have done. Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me what it is you plan to do with your one wild and precious life. This is a hard season. It's a hard season to remember who we're called to be at times. In Galatians, we're told, brothers and sisters, carry each other's burdens. Galatians 5. If God is holding us and we are holding each other, and we are remembering to take time for the emotional, the spiritual, the psychological, physical, and social self-care domains, we will be able to carry our children, our mothers, our fathers, our friends, as well as ourselves. You too need a moment for healing, a moment for grace. You need a moment to claim for self-care. If you'll notice, my daughter Isabel gave me these circles for a necklace. We had had a long conversation about God and how God calls us, and she wasn't too keen on the idea of crosses and glorification of suffering. And I concurred. I told her I'd be thrilled if Christians adopted more of circles as images to hold up. Circles meaning the resurrection, circles meaning new life, circles meaning generativity and hope and grace holding us tight. Circles. I'd like to hold each of you in a circle of prayer. I'd like to know that you're holding me in that same circle, and that we're rejoicing together in the circle of God's grace and God's love. And that as we pay attention to ideas of self-care, that we also remember we're part of a larger community caring for one another, carrying one another's burdens, just as we were called to do. I'd like you to draw a circle and remember that the God of grace has filled that circle to the fullest so that we can make it through difficult times. And no matter how heavy and stressful that time seems, we are able to get through it together with God's grace and holding each other tight. Blessings on your journey.
So welcome, everyone. It's my privilege to be here to facilitate this panelist presentation on women in leadership and self-care. My name is Beth Buckles. I'm the Dean of the School of Behavioral Health at Loma Linda University and founder of our Loma Linda University International Behavioral Health Trauma Team. So let me begin by introducing our panelists. And I'm going to ask each to add to what I might not get correct. So let me begin with Anita Roberts. Welcome, Anita. Anita has her Master of Arts in Pastoral Ministry. She is the Women's Ministries Director and Clergy Spouse Care and provides the prayer ministry program for the Loma Linda University Church. And I understand, Anita, that during this time you have extended the prayer group, for several months to support people during the pandemic, to assist in providing additional social and spiritual care to many. Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Thank you. Thank you, Beverly. Yes, I have the privilege of working with pastoral spouse care and women's ministries for Southeastern California Conference. At this time, with the prayer ministry, which you mentioned, indeed, our plan was to have a 21-day, under a month in time of prayer. But the need was so evident. There were so many people that are shut in, women that have, not the ability to any longer care for themselves and go out and such things. And we find that those are the people that call. And we have several dozen people calling every day. And here we are, months and months later, and we continue to do that every day.
Well, I'm sure people greatly appreciate your support and those resources that you're providing. Let me move on to our next panelist. Jamie Stadola has her master's in marriage and family therapy. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist. She is working with the Tustin Christian Counseling Center. And Jamie has been running an educational program for the Loma Linda University Church, teaching self-care during this time of the pandemic, and has been a great advocate for the church to move into leadership in this area. Thank you, Jamie. And would you like to add anything that I've missed in your introduction?
I don't think so. I think you got it right. I know that just to kind of broaden what you'd said about the advocation for the church, keep your eyes peeled. We are definitely trying to bring other programs along to support people virtually during this time. Most recent talked about is a grief and grief recovery group. So we're working on that right now, and just trying to listen for what the needs are and see how we can provide.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's really wonderful. Thank you also. And our next panelist is Dr. Rita Mercer. She is a clinical psychologist, clinical forensic psychologist, and she leads a group called Seeking Safety at Mount Rubidoux Church. I understand that's now an online program during this time. She has also been involved in the Stennis Enterprises program, which is a women's conferences that addresses the needs of women in the San Bernardino area. And I understand, Dr. Mercer, you're doing a lot more than that as well. Would you like to add to that, please?
Thank you so much, Dr. Buckles. Yes, my work has started out with the chat series was first on ground at the Mount Rubidoux Seventh-day Adventist Church. And of course, as the pandemic hit, we were able to pivot to the online chat series that started off as a women's issues platform. Every Saturday afternoon from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. we brought on licensed psychologists, pastors, and other experts to talk about various women's issues, the role of women. We just had one on the superwoman syndrome, and it turned into a social justice issue.
I'm very impressed, and I understand why you've all been picked as panelists here to support our worldwide church. I also just want to say, as you're speaking about this, what you've reminded me is the church is a soft landing place. It's a home that we can provide so many additional things of hope and healing, and it really shows the other part of what Christ knew, that we're more than what we see physically. There are wounds and other things that are invisible. And so that's really what we're also going to be talking about today, the self-care that supports people. So the first question I'd like to address with you all, and we'll just go around the panel in the way that you were introduced, if that's acceptable. Self-care does seem to be a highly personal and oftentimes even a spiritual discipline. Can you speak to signs that you watch for within yourself that help you to understand or signal to you when there may be burnout or there is a need for self-care? And Anita, I'll start with you.
Thank you. Well, as women, I think we especially tend to want to care for others first before we care even for ourselves. And we are created beings to give and to take. And if we give and give and give, there comes a point where we can give no more. And I think people, women especially, whether it's in the family, in the work environment, and relationships, as they begin to get depleted, depression sets in, irritability sets in, frustration. And I think we can see little pieces of that on a daily basis as physical symptoms begin to happen as well. People have lack of sleep, and then as people come, and sometimes I have the privilege in a pastoral setting to interact with women, with pastor spouses, and of different ages. It is a part where just mental health begins to affect. The spiritual aspect of it is huge, where people just begin to lose hope and feel that even God is no longer present in their lives. And so there's many signs. I guess that's I think personal awareness of that is so important, to see the early signs of that.
Thank you. Jamie.
I would say what I do is kind of maybe an example of what Anita might be talking about. And that is, even when I'm in session or, working with somebody who's in need, sometimes during and especially after or in between meeting with clients, I'll do a body scan and I'll just say what am I feeling in my body? What emotions might I have coming away from that meeting or that session? And then there might be times where, of course, if I'm quite busy with a lot of helping to carry a lot of people's burdens, I'll notice that it might start to interrupt my sleep a little bit. Maybe I didn't sleep as well, or maybe I'm feeling more fatigued. And so at that point, I again would hopefully already kind of mitigate those things from happening by keeping on top of it, even day to day. At the end of the day, saying, okay, what do I need as a caretaker, as somebody who likes to care for others and provide, relief? I have to check in with myself and say, what is it that I need today, where I have to take care of myself first? Sometimes, and not just sometimes, all the time, I'm asking God to work through me, that I need his strength, because there are times where people are in my office and I do not necessarily know what to say, but I look to the Lord and the Holy Spirit to guide and direct me. And so it's just kind of this balance between, God, I need you in me, I need your strength, and then sensing, where am I maybe holding on to something that someone is sharing with me. And so on a level where maybe somebody isn't doing the work that I'm doing, they can still check in with themselves. They can, if it's, taking care of their family, or even in their job that might not be about caretaking, they still can check in with themselves and say, okay, where am I feeling any kind of something that is maybe manifesting somewhere in their body? So, right, if they have fear, where are they feeling that? Where can they identify that in their body and help themselves to say, what do I need? What can I do to calm myself? And then, like Anita was saying, the bigger picture is looking at how that might be affecting other functions of life. So it's at that point where I say, okay, I need a little more of a reprieve, or I need a little extra self-care, or I might be able to identify that I need some social support, social interaction to kind of help round out my own self-care.
Thank you. Dr. Mercer, what would you like to share?
Yes, thank you. Anita and Jamie did say a lot of what we try to do in terms of, mental health care providers, checking with ourselves, making sure that we are pouring into ourselves when we need it. Me personally, I lead the Seeking Safety Support Group. So every week I have to be checking in with myself to make sure that I'm ready for this event. And so, along with my daily devotional time, I also walk in the mornings or in the evenings to really get some fresh air, clear my mind, think about the day, think about the week, and think about, what I want to do next, commune with God. That's my favorite thing to do, is to walk. And also to check in with a favorite book that I'm reading. Currently, I'm reading The Purpose-Driven Life, and that book has started to really speak to me in a way that it hadn't before. And so that's been another way that I've been able to pour into myself, my own personal development, along with walking and my devotional time with God. That helps me to recharge for the day and for the week.
And what was the name of the book you said you're reading?
The Purpose-Driven Life by
okay.
Pastor Rick Warren. Yes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. One of the things I noticed that each of you are speaking about are those body reactions to stress. And I think it's important that when we think about self-care, we realize, and stress, that, and especially during this pandemic, you hear so much about mental illness and mental health. It's like stress isn't actually mental illness. It is a response to situations, and these are abnormal times. There's a lot of responses that we have that could be very normal to these very abnormal situations. What I also like what you're saying is that, the body and the mind are connected. And so much of the time, most of us have learned to ignore the signs of what may be happening in our body that is the first trigger or the first indicator that it's not going very well for us. But we, as women in particular, I think we shove it aside, we shove it aside, we shove it aside until it becomes really big. And then we may not feel well, and we may not be well physically even. So learning to track or to read those body signs and then think about what does help the most. So I'm going to go reverse order now, because Dr. Mercer, you mentioned some things that you do, which really leads to the next question that I'd like us to talk about. And that is, so when we think about our own self-care, what are the things that we do? And do we need to do them alone, or can we do them with others? How do we do self-care? Alone, others? What's the best way to do it?
So, as a mental health individual practitioner, typically it's been, the training has indicated it needs to be an individual thing in terms of how you yourself, as we talked earlier, we listen to our bodies, we make sure that we are taking care of ourselves in terms of eating, sleeping, making sure that we are mentally, physically, and spiritually intact, right? So that we can monitor our emotions. This is what we're trying to do. We're trying to monitor our emotions, monitor our moods, so that we don't fall into a deep depression or deep sadness based on what we're doing. To answer your question in terms of communal, of course, we are social beings, and clearly we need that connection, and we all should take time out to involve ourselves with social activity, whether it be our family, now that we're on a different type of social information in terms of our distancing. We're using Zoom more. Others are using FaceTime or Skype or whatever it is to talk to family and friends who aren't nearby. This is how we keep our connection. So yes, it can be community. It can also be individual, and it's important for us to be well-rounded in each of those areas.
Thank you, Jamie. Is there something you'd like to add to that?
I second what Rita was saying. I think that one of the things to maybe keep in mind is to not try to judge yourself that you should be with people or you should be alone. The more that you get used to scanning your body and scanning and putting names to the emotions that you have, the more you'll be in tune with yourself. You'll have an internal intuition about what you need. And then on top of that, you'll be able to determine on which end of the spectrum do you need to be with people. So if we look at those that recharge, if we look at self-care being recharging, based on how much time I need alone and how much time I need with other people. I would be able to say, okay, well, right now I need other people to help me recharge. And so some people who are on the further end of, for example, being an introvert and needing more time alone to recharge, they might, you see where some people might be like, oh, well, but this is always what I need. Or they may even judge other people or try to tell other people what they need, when really they have to be the one to say, okay, I'm in tune enough to say that I need to be with people right now to recharge.
And Anita.
Well, thank you. When I think of self-care, especially thinking from a spiritual point of view, I think, okay, so you look at a scripture, and am I called to be a Martha and a Mary all in once? Well, that would be admirable and maybe attainable, but it would be, very stressful if we tried to do all at once, or try to be the Proverbs 31 woman where everybody will call me blessed. Well, you see the list and it just seems overwhelming. So I think, so how do I be what God wants me to be, and yet do it in a healthy way, in a way that it replenishes me before I can give? Because God, I think, created us. We are designed to be that way. We are designed to be people that receive and give and receive and give. That's how God loves. And so I think I have a couple of suggestions. I guess the first would be, for me, it would be encouraging women to rest in the assurance that we are beloved by God. I think at the core of who we are, spiritual beings, if we can, take that and meditate on that. I remember I read somewhere that if we take 12 minutes a day to meditate on God as the God of love, Heavenly Father, if we take that, it is life-changing. I mean, you talk about studies on even mental health as we age, and dementia, all that. It was just amazing to me to read, because I think it was in the Aging Brain book that I read that. And so I was just fascinated by that. I thought, okay, so just literally resting in that knowledge that we are beloved by God, take hold of that assurance as we look at, okay, so how do I replenish? And then we have to refresh our hearts, our minds. Scripture, for me, plays a huge a role in my life. And I think for those of us as Christian women, as believers, as followers of Jesus, it's important to do that. The psalmist says, your word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. So taking hold of that, of the promises of God, refreshing also at the feet of Jesus in prayer. And I think that's one of the things that we talked about earlier, just that can be alone. And I find that very intimate, a time where I can pour out my heart to God and just say, take this, take the burdens, take the impossibilities, take the challenges and the circumstances today, and fill me with that assurance or that spirit, so I can, really walk. And I love what Dr. Mercer said, to just then in that, I mean, I sometimes go on walks just to pray. I enjoy walking very much as well, and just praying with gratitude. Gratitude plays a huge role, even in circumstances that are difficult. Lord, how do I thank you for this situation? As difficult as it is, what are you trying to teach me? What are you saying to me? How am I going to trust you? Show me, teach me, but it can be a walk. It can be gardening. It can be watching a bird feeder. I know some people that just love to watch those YouTube videos where animals in the wild, or somebody said, they had one up in the mountains here where people were watching a nest, and how the mom was coming and feeding the bird, or what have you. Things like that just really refresh our mind and remind us of God's creation and the greater purpose, And then the last one that I would suggest would be then that love, that circle of love. 1 Corinthians 13:5 says, love does not seek its own. So once we have received, we have to give, and it has to be in a healthy, selfless way. I love the concept of, I think it was Carl Menninger, the founder of that famous clinic. He said something that, if you're struggle, walk outside your home, find someone in need and do something for them. That will change you. And so I think for those of us as believers, to take that to heart and say, okay, God, I have been replenished, I have been refilled, I have been resting in your presence. So now I can go and give to others.
What I love about what you're all saying is you're reminding me that with God, we have ultimate privacy and ultimate confidentiality.
Mm-hmm.
And all those things that we might not even like about ourselves, we can take those to him. We can say, here, and even thank you. In this circumstance, you're reminding me of prayers I've even had recently. Thank you for the circumstance. Help me not to do my normal reaction to the circumstance. Yes. Because my normal reaction may not be the healthiest one for me or anybody else at this time. Mm-hmm. What I also love what you're saying, and Anita, you gave lots of examples just now, as you all did, that there are different choice points of self-care. Mm-hmm. But I went to school a very, very long time ago, and we did guided imagery as the way to distress everybody. It didn't matter what the need was, but we did it. And I remember, and you triggered this thought, that there you be laying on the ground and they would take you through the woods, and I would think, it's wet and I'm getting stung by mosquitoes and I don't like this. It wasn't relaxing at all for me. Telling somebody else what is good for them is not the right path. Suggesting what helps you the most.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And then having people recognize when something is helping them the most, they can go back to it. You like to take walks. I put up this picture because I love color. I love creativity. I love the beauty of nature and these little infinite things that you see, like the birds and all those things. So is it appropriate then to tell people, find what helps you the most in those moments and use those opportunities, prayer, but rather than telling them, just go do this or just go do this, that people should seek what helps them the most, because we are different. I do think God gives us a lot of different opportunities to understand his gifts and his presence. So there are some very special circumstances going on right now, as you know, and there are different age groups that need help and support. And as you've also pointed out, women are usually taking care of all those groups, everybody. What would you suggest? Are there particular things that you would suggest for, and you can pick the group that you want to address, but I do have colleagues who are taking care of very small children, and they are also taking care of their parents. And they are that sandwich generation. Or they may also have college-age kids who are really struggling with the isolation and not being able to do things. But what would you suggest for, and pick your group, older adults, how to help support them, children, whatever the age group may be. Let me start back with you, Anita. What would you do? What would you say?
You know, one thing that probably could be used across the board that is very, very simple, I think that I would suggest would be just a gratitude journal. Whether it's on your phone or actually a piece of, a notebook. I have one by my bedside. And not every single night, but it can be in the evening, it can be in the morning. Just take time to look for new things that you're thankful for. Mm-hmm. I think focusing our mind in positive things. And honestly, am I thankful for what? For simple things. I mean, you look around and there is so much to be sad about, so many challenges, difficulties, illness, sorrow. And so we go into a world to help others. Mm-hmm. How do we, for me, to begin that with gratitude is very important. And I think that is something that we can teach even children. We're modeling to them how to live life. If they hear us complaining or bickering, or they pick up on that. So even just simple things as just gratitude, focusing on gratitude. That would be one suggestion.
Thank you. Jamie.
I actually want to go off of what Anita is saying, because last night I was doing a little bit of research and I'm reading some books. And so I Googled, I don't know if you've all heard, any of you heard that the idea that when you put a plant or a piece of food and you have a control item, and then you have an item in a plant or a piece of food that people say kind things to or they express gratitude to, and another one where they would might say harsh words to, the plant or the food, whatever it is, would grow moldy, or the plant would die for those that have been saying harsh things to. And then the one that has not had anything is just kind of normal, kind of maybe doing its normal process. And then the one that they have been saying grateful things to or kind things to is thriving, perhaps not moldy or decaying, and the plant is doing well. And so there's a professor who did this experiment with water, and whether they labeled the water the contents, could have even been like icky water. When they said kind things to that water, the water crystals formed into something beautiful and symmetrical. And when they said harsh things to that water, it was all like not symmetrical, and it wasn't very lovely. And this is a reminder to us that we are human organisms. We are 80-90% water, essentially. And so when we speak beautiful things into people, including ourselves or the people we love, it is definitely changing them. So Anita, you were saying, focus on gratitude. So one of the things that a mother can do for herself, but also model for her family, is or a parent, not just a mother, but kind of talking about age groups, but is to model this, because they will, of course, feel that for themselves, but they'll grow that, or they will help to create that positive beauty in the people around them, so their children or their family. So just kind of an anecdotal, kind of maybe a visual, yet a very scientific, real thing that you could go and search for yourself to see this. This particular professor was saying that they did this experiment actually with kids, and they helped the kids to see the water crystals changing under the microscope, and they were blown away. But especially the mothers were blown away, because they were realizing, wow, we can speak this into our kids.
And it is scientific. It isn't just something odd. It is actually scientific. And I do remember these studies. I don't remember all the details, but I do think there might have been something also with the difference of sound wave in terms of the harshness of versus the softness of that, whatever that percussion difference is that can affect the environment. So that's really interesting. But we also think about how that affects us when we change our tone.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there are different vibrations that the harshness causes, and that affects the water. So precisely, I mean, we are water, we're composed of that. And so scientifically, it's just phenomenal to search that a little bit and see how much power there is with the words that we use. And if you think about it, God spoke the world into existence with words.
Right. I also, what I hear you saying, Jamie, is that how we can bring joy, and it softens moments. It's a different type of the Lord's peace. And wherever we can do that, and that can come from journaling, that can come from other kinds of things. But yes, our words matter.
Our ability to laugh gives us an actual physical response in our, vocal vibration, or in our body and in our chest. And so we are, we're helping to create that, and God gives us that. He wants us to find joy and gratitude in all things.
Well, I know this is a scientific area that Dr. Mercer studied as a psychologist, how the body, the nervous system is reset by those positive kinds of things. Dr. Mercer, what else would you like to add to this conversation?
Thank you. As I was listening to Nita and Jamie, some thoughts came to me, and as you were talking, Dr. Buckles, regarding, how this pandemic has put families together, right? We talked about how mothers are taking care of their children now, children are at home at school, also may have elderly parents living with them. And one of the things that came to my mind is, because of the way we were pre the pandemic, family time was missing, right? Being able to be together in terms of how we socialize in terms of family. Some families perhaps were having issues with that, but I think the pandemic has brought that back to the surface. And one of the things I want to piggyback on what Jamie was saying is, creating pleasant memories, right? The brain is it's a computer basically, and it stores information. And what better way to, as Jamie was saying about laughing, that whole body reaction of your whole body laughing and exuding this noise, right? And so playing family games, right? Board games, those kinds of things you used to do when you were little. Pull out the games, your parents were in it. If you had a aunt and uncle were involved, everybody could participate. What a wonderful way to incorporate everyone in an activity that produces, bonding, produces connections with the other generation, both younger and older, a way to exuberate, pleasant memory and laughter, right? Games always produce laughter, and that's a wonderful way to, help us during this time when those of us may have, as Anita was saying, there's a lot of things going on in the world, right? And as you, Dr. Buckles, was saying, we are in these unprecedented times. And so this is a great way to help to change that, right? We can, as this comes forward, we can have more positive interaction with each other so that the other parts of this situation can be minimized as much as possible, really for the younger ones. So the younger ones may not know what's going on, may have concerns about what's happening. And so this is a great way to, parents can model for their children how you behave in a stressful situation.
I love what you're saying. Jamie, did you want to say something?
And know that it might feel a little bit odd at first if you've gone through all of this pandemic without really considering how to create these moments. But I was also just going to say, from a spiritual perspective, I believe God wants this wholeheartedly for all families. So pour out your heart and ask Him to help you find those moments, first and foremost, that you are able to recognize, and then find the moments that He might be bringing, the Holy Spirit might be helping to create or give ideas. Because when you seek Him with all of your heart, you'll find Him. And I believe this is one of those ways.
So I love what you're saying, because I think that what we want people to hear, that it's okay to be intentional to seek joy. It's okay to be intentional to move away from the distress. We're not talking about avoidance. It's not going away just by saying, I'm not going to think about it. But it changes the moment. It changes our well-being. It actually changes our nervous system. We do know that from a scientific standpoint too. But let's do things intentionally that bring that joy. And what you've also reminded me, Dr. Mercer, I have self-care long distance of an older adult who is isolated in all the ways that they're not happy about. Even the limited mobility is gone now. And you reminded me of what I'm not sure I was as intentional as I now think. Well, good, the Lord saw through and made it more intentional. She's taping memories of things that we wouldn't have if she didn't tape them. I won't know the stories, but someone could write down the stories. They could make that family tree. There are things that are very precious and do bring a lot of joy. Some things we do might also evoke tears. But I think it's important to know that as humans, we hold both emotions, but tears are also a gift. Joy is a gift and tears are a gift. And if one emotion becomes too heavy, move back to the other gift of joy. And that's certainly okay to do, and to find whatever those opportunities may be for people. I have another relative who is an artist. So I've asked him to draw some things for me. Now, he was too moody to get into, oh, no, I don't want to. It's like, but I actually do need you to do this. And could you do that? He's rediscovering how much he enjoys picking up the pen, and he can even just think about the anticipation. I'm going to get home, which I found very interesting for him to say, when I get home, I've got some ideas. Just doing that when he was at work helped him to pull himself away from the stress, because he could sense that positive energy that was going to come to him even without the pen or the drawing items being with him. So that's really very, very important. There's a lot of things happening to people that Dr. Mercer, you mentioned, Anita, you've mentioned, I think we've all hit on it, that it's not just about this disease process. It's about what is also brought to light. And we're seeing things now, maybe because we're more sequestered and we're more aware of the blatant injustice and inequality that some people are experiencing more than others. How do we give support to those people in this time? It can be very frightening for them right now. How do we support them?
I think it's very important that we listen. And I think if we try to solve problems without listening, that is, there's a huge misconnect, because unless I hear your story and unless I pray for empathy, the easiest, most simple definition of empathy that I've heard is your pain in my heart. Mm-hmm. And so I think recognizing that people's lives and experiences are, theirs, and then we need to enter into that pain and pray for God's wisdom, because once we enter into that pain, that's a very, I call that a very sacred, holy space. In our prayer ministries, we talk about when people come and say, I need prayer, I'm going through a divorce, I was just diagnosed with, terminal cancer, or whatever that situation may be, and I'm experiencing this, injustices at work. So how do we enter into that pain and allow God to help us support, understand, and then help people, because we don't want to stay in that forever. We want to acknowledge it, learn it, help it, understand it, and then also lift people up and find a way to bring solutions that they find would be helpful. So it's a process, but I think it begins with listening with an empathetic heart.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Mercer, you're running groups to support people during this time, recognizing the injustices. What do you recommend for us?
So thank you, Dr. Buckles and Anita. I think listening is very, very important. And also, along with that line, is believing them, right? Many times when about what they're feeling, there is this, that's really happening, and not perhaps there's a disbelief on the other end of that communication. And so it's important that their stories are believed, along with the empathy aspect of it. And also what she was saying, also what Anita was saying, is asking them what will be beneficial to them. I think along this time is advocacy and allyship, right? Being able to support individuals of color who are going through various issues during this time, and being a front runner. If you hear things in your space, if you recognize there is something happening at your employment or in your church for that matter, it's important that someone is there to rectify the wrong that is being said or being done, so that you're modeling to others what the appropriate behavior should be.
Mm-hmm. And Christ wouldn't have allowed the injustices. He didn't allow these injustices.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Jamie.
As I listen to Anita and Dr. Mercer, I'm reflecting on Christ's life on earth. And he listened. If you think of his time here, he listened, and then he responded, or then he asked a question. And that is what we're to do. And we are to provide relief or support to help those that are oppressed. And that is very main job of us here as Christians. And so that's really any I guess ethnicity or any group of people that is oppressed, and that is our job. So I second exactly what they were saying. I mean, we could not do our job to help people in our ministries and in our work if we don't first listen to people.
I want to wrap up on a very positive point, because what you are hitting on, all three of you, again, is the community of God. And the church is a representation of the community of God. And I think all of us need to ask ourselves, how do we help to bring that joy of God into the lives of other people? I do believe Christ wants us to live full of joy.
Amen.
And have that with us all the time. Even saying his name, we know, brings peace. And then as church members, to intentionally bring people into that fold. People have all kinds of things in their head that may or may not be accurate, may be based upon self-talk that has been generations old and has been filtered through some pretty aggressive other things that people have done to them or said to them. So joining together as this community and with this effort that's going forth around the world to stand up for what Christ really wanted us to do.
God designed us with so many facets to our lives, and they all need to be cared for. I'm really looking forward to thinking in my own life how I can care for every part of me. Let's bow our heads. God, thank you for time in nature, time with friends, and time benefiting others. Thank you that we get to do these things so that we can shine more brightly the reflection of your love. Amen. Come back next week when we talk about how the pandemic has changed the face of ministry, perhaps forever.